I'm Reverend Dennis McCarty, your first stop on the Minister of the Month Club tour. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Venice. For our opening song this morning, we're going to do the first two verses of number 170, We Are a Gentle, Angry People, and I invite you, gentle and angry. I invite you to stand as you're willing and able and join in singing the first two verses.
Seated, please. Well, welcome all. Welcome this morning to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Venice, or as we call it, UCOV. I'm Jack Head, a member of the Board of Trustees. Here we strive to be a beacon of liberal religion for Southwest Florida and a refuge for all of those seeking a welcoming community. Here we practice welcome fellowship by embracing everybody's diversities, regardless of your religious belief, spiritual journey, creed, or political affiliation. Here we celebrate our differences, where we learn from one another. We celebrate our unlike-mindedness and how we express it. We welcome you gay, straight, tall, short, left-handed, right-handed, no matter who you love, your gender, of expression. Welcome. If you'd like to know more about our congregation and its many opportunities for learning, growth, and connection, you can do so by viewing our calendar and announcements either on Facebook or our webpage at uucov.org. Or seek out one of the members of the trustees and they will answer your questions. Hi, all you people at home in your pajamas. If you are joining us online, please consider navigating to our website and click the donate button. Please give generously as you can. Ushers, during the announcements, would you please pass the baskets? And remember, we are self-funded, so every dollar counts. Welcome to church today. I hope you find something during the service that speaks to you or maybe lifts you up or changes the way you think about things or lead in your spiritual reflection and personal growth. We're glad you've come to be with us today. If you're visiting for the first time, we would love to meet you. Please introduce yourself with your name and where you're from. Do we have anybody here? Yes, please.
My name is Deb Baker. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. Go Bengals.
In that order, go Bengals. Thank you from Cincinnati. Anybody else? Do we have any people returning? Yes. Well, welcome from Port Charlotte. You got a passport to get here. Thank you for coming. Anybody else? Anybody returning that we can? Stand up and say hi, please, so we know you're here. So good that you're here. Now I'm going to give you some announcements, but as you know, and have probably received a sheet of paper like this, this changes every 2 weeks. So make sure you get the newest one, which they change by color, and it'll tell you some of the things that are happening here. I have a few that I'd like to bring to your attention. One is a walking group. We'll meet at 9 o'clock tomorrow at Sleepy Turtle Preserve. The Arts Craft group at Waters Hall at 1 to 4. On Tuesday, the moderator group meets at 10 a.m. The caring team meets at 1 o'clock at Waters Hall. I only have a few more. Communication team meets on Wednesday at 10. That's dual platformed. Thursday, the book club will meet. The Board of Trustees meets at 9:30. Chorus practice at 4. The last person to leave the building, please make sure you turn the lights off and lock the place. We've had a few occasions where one or more of the buildings have been left unlocked when we leave, and we do have a few things that wouldn't want to replace if we didn't have to. After the service today, there will be a discussion time for those who would like to ask the board questions about the interim and the process of where we are and what we're doing and how we're going through that. If you are interested in your spiritual practices, another group starts on Tuesday, February 1st, here in 15th. I wasn't listening. If you are interested in being a part of that, please contact Kathy Avery, our Director of Religious Education. You want to raise your hand so they see you? Thank you. On February 22nd, we will have a concert at 4 o'clock in the sanctuary. Come to hear a number of West Side Story, Little Night Magic, Company, Into the Woods, and others. Very talented group of singers will perform for you. See Don Spitz for more information. Don, would you please stand and wave your hand? Thank you. Please commit to coming by signing up outside in the lanai. Our performers need to know there will be a good audience. We're in the midst of a pledge drive. Some of you have participated, 58%, and we need to have the rest who have pledges either contact the treasurer directly by an email or mail back your forms. Or, as I've been told, the finance committee is going to come to your house. We used to do that in the old days, but they always found that they had too many cookies and tea and they gained weight, so they stopped doing it in that process. They'd much rather do it this way by not being in your presence in your homes. So please take advantage of the documents that were sent to you. The pledge drive is very important. It's only a commitment as far as you are concerned to what you are established to do at the present time. If things change, you can change the pledge. But the finance committee needs to have concrete numbers to know what we can do next year and how we can continue our community involvement. Thank you for putting money in the basket. I see that that's already been done. Thank you. Every dollar counts. We are fortunate to have a published Unitarian Universalist minister today and through the month. He is returning after being our sabbatical minister a few years ago. Dennis had a successful life before accepting the call to become a minister. And his first challenge as a minister was for caring of individuals in hospitals where they face their demise and the care of their souls. For 12 years, he was the called minister in Columbus, Indiana, where the congregation grew, outgrowing their building, and as a settled minister, he guided the congregation by obtaining land and constructing a new church. As he left for retirement, he saw his church campus grow into 3 religions in one parking lot, thus creating a religious campus. He has dedicated most of his life to the beauty of the English language. This results have been set forth in well-reviewed novels, nonfiction books, plays, essays, and magazine articles. He has shared his dedication in some of the lyrics and songwriting with this and other congregations. He is active in the Zen Center in Bloomington, Indiana. Over the years, he has been a sailor, electrician, a heavy construction worker, a teacher, and nationally published novelist, and of course, a minister. In June 2015, he retired to become a minister emeritus and is still a dynamic public. He preaches a lot. He writes songs and newspaper columns. He remains active in the Unitarian Universalist Association. His book, Thoughts of a Gentle Atheist, is available in UCOV Library and online. Please welcome my friend, the Reverend Dennis McCarty, freelance minister emeritus, and Kate Ellis to our spiritual home and to the sanctuary.
For all the talk about skeptical Unitarian Universalists, we are at our cores people of deep faith in rising and going about the tasks of each day, in gathering to share enlightenment and struggling to act on the words we preach. We live into our embodied faith in the real world. We live into the faith that there is meaning and significance to what we do. In caring about our fellow beings and in working for positive change, we express our living faith that the future can be better than the past. Let us reflect and celebrate together. And I'll light the chalice. We light this chalice to symbolize the light of aspiration, the challenge of truth, and the beauty of justice in our own lives and in the world. And I invite you to stand as you're willing and able and join in singing the last 4 verses to number 170, We Are a Gentle, Angry People. Check. Prelude. I'll have this down by next week. The wonderful thing about having a really good musician is that she can get you out of any trouble you get into. Now we'll try standing as we're willing and able and singing number 170. We are a gentle, angry people. Last 4 verses. Seated. It has been said that if you live heedfully and caringly, everybody is a minister. So for our responsive reading this morning, I brought a sample covenant. Of course, there are covenants everywhere you look around here, but this is one more, the covenant of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association, which was passed about 12 years ago. And as always, I'll read the straight type, and I invite you to respond with the boldface type. United in our call to serve the spirit of love and justice in the liberal religious tradition, we covenant with one another to conduct ourselves with integrity, honoring the trust placed in us. To support one another in collegial respect and care, understanding and honoring the diversity within our association. To hold ourselves accountable to each other with the competent exercise of our vocation. To use our power constructively and with intention, mindful of our potential unconsciously to perpetuate systems of oppression. To cultivate practices of deepening awareness, understanding, humility, and commitment to our ideals. To labor earnestly together for the well-being of our communities and the progress of Unitarian Universalism. And together, through fidelity to this covenant, we aspire to grow in wholeness and bring hope and healing to the world. Test, test. Ooh, it works. Okay, if the kids want to come up, we're going to make a little noise. I hate using equipment that's smart. Oh, Kathy had it covered anyway. I hate using equipment that's smarter than I am. And it happens so much anymore. Okay. Oh dear. Well, you're going to have to share some noisemakers. I brought a bunch of noisemakers here. There we go. Yeah, you can hold the mic, jam it right up in my face here. How's that? Everybody can hear me, right? Okay. Well, you know, different religious traditions have different sounds that kind of get associated with that religious tradition. For example, Japanese Zen Buddhism and also Christian churches ring bells. The Japanese start and finish their sitting meditation by ringing a bell. So you might say that's the sound of Japanese Zen. And of course, Christian churches ring their bell usually in the morning. So that's the sound of a Christian church too. Who wants to ring a bell? We're going to have to short somebody here. I didn't bring enough noisemakers. Okay, so try ringing that puppy. Yeah. There you go. Okay. These are, and I've forgotten the technical term, but Tibetan hand chimes, and Tibetan Buddhists ring these. And they're a very gentle sound. Look here. There we go. So you might say that's the sound of at least some of the schools of Tibetan Buddhism. Who wants to try one of these? Oh, let's just keep it going right down the line. Here's one you probably haven't seen, unless, I don't know, maybe Blue Lotus uses them, I don't know. This is called a moktok. A moktok. And I know I picked this up in Korea when I was working there, but Japanese Zen Buddhists use it also. So this is one sound. They use this to keep rhythm while they chat. So I'll hold it out here because it's noisy. Okay, so that's the sound of Korean or Japanese Zen. Pass that on down the line. It's very versatile. Yeah, it's kind of slippery. Whack that rascal. Yeah, that's pretty noisy too. Okay, and of course this is well known now. This is a singing bowl. I actually got this from Tibetan monks, and sometimes I can make it sing and sometimes it won't behave, but let's give it a try here. There we go. Okay, so this is a singing bowl. And of course, you can also use it as a bell. And a lot of churches use it as a bell. They use it like that. Or if you're sitting Zen, they do it like that. Okay, so I'll pass that on down the line. And I just have to thank you for holding the microphone because I only have 4 of these things. But you know what? We can clap our hands because sometimes they do that in Unitarian Universalist churches, right? Okay, so now if you and you and you and you and you will all make your noises together, go ahead. All of them together. Be just as loud as you can. That's the sound of Unitarian Universalism. Thanks, gang. Okay. That's the sound of Unitarian Universalism. And so what have you got going in class today? They don't know yet, but they're going to find out, right? Well, as Reverend Van Zandt always said, have fun and learn something. Yes?
The cats is in class?
Maybe. And now we're going to sing. This is the part of our service where we share the trials and triumphs of our lives, our celebrations and sorrows. And if you have a celebration, please stand up and prompt. Let's see if I can get the P's, B's, and N's. Non-political, brief, and personal.
I just wanted to make sure you noticed our beautiful ramp that's been put up, and who suggested it? You. Thank you.
You know, this was very impressive, I gotta tell you. I've been getting ignored by churches for a lot of time, you know, and they actually paid attention. I'm impressed, and it happened fast.
I have a visitor from my daughter. Allison is visiting from Virginia.
Hi, Allison.
The celebration is regarding Lisa Frank, our organist, as described in the newspaper this weekend, but I learned something about her that makes my admiration grow exponentially. She worked and taught in Colombia, South America. We need to hear about that and learn more at some point. Thank you, Lisa. With pleasure.
Thank you. What are we doing?
My celebration is that I don't have COVID and I'm not carrying it. But I learned last Sunday that I had been exposed to somebody who did come down with it. And in a frenzy, on Monday, I was trying to get a test and failed. First of all, I didn't know where my health insurance was processed. That was one of the questions on the CVS form. And, you know, my husband's company was a multinational corporation, so I started making phone calls. Eventually, by complete accident, I found how to get tested over at the community center. And I just wanted to share this with you because it was so easy. I'm going to put this out in the lobby someplace, but you can do this online. I didn't know that, so I had to wait till I get there. But if you go to www.covidwhitewait.com/Venice, you can fill the form out online. I went over, I got tested very quickly. There were only 2 cars ahead of me, and they said 36 to 48 hours. I heard the next morning, and it was just so easy. And, you know, if you have any concerns, that's the way to do it.
New routines, don't you know? Do we have sorrows to share?
Yes, I'm Peggy Drogash. My sorrow is that my baby sister passed away last Sunday, and we had been very dear friends for 80 years.
Just for anybody who doesn't know, our treasurer, Dave Lyon, also did test positive for COVID. He's doing fine now. He had a scary day or two, but he's doing fine now. These are the moments of our lives, and always the joy and the cost of living is that we feel what we're living. We lift up those who celebrate and rejoice and hold within our hearts all who suffer or grieve. Let us join for a moment in silent prayer or meditation, each reflecting in the manner most suited for each. The the hopes in this community are offered forth in the names of all those people who have gone before, in the names of all those who will come after, in the names of all the helpers of humankind. Shalom, salam, blessed be. Amen. We have a reading this morning from a book titled Reading the Old Testament, an introduction. It's kind of a how-to manual. He writes, "We can learn much about Israel's covenant with the Lord, Yahweh, by comparing Old Testament descriptions with actual examples of covenants between ancient nations. Ancient treaties show two major types. One is a treaty between equal kings, and this is called generally a parity treaty. We possess an excellent example of this kind of covenant in the peace treaty between King Ramses I of Egypt and the Hittite king Hattusilus to end their war in Syria about 1290 BC, and we actually have a copy of that. The second type is the vassal treaty, made between an overlord, a major power, and the small nations that were either conquered by him or was forced to cooperate lest he take them over. The two types of treaty differ in the kind of obligations that the party take on. In the parity treaty, each side agrees to mutual responsibilities because they have equal status and neither can force the other to carry out their obligations. But in the vassal treaty, the overlord usually does not bind himself to any particular duties beyond being kindly and protective of the vassal. But he does spell out a series of demands for the vassal to faithfully perform, like, say, the Ten Commandments. This second type is the more helpful in interpreting the Sinai covenant between Yahweh, the divine overlord, and Israel, the mere creatures whom he has chosen. just way too fun. Wish I could do that. Unitarian Universalism has a somewhat unique place in America's religious landscape. We are, of course, a liberal religion, but that's not what makes us unique. Every major religious tradition has liberal branches. And it's worth taking a look at how a liberal religious tradition differs from a conservative one, because it's worth keeping in mind. Very briefly, the more conservative a religion is, the more it concentrates on human worthlessness, the power of authority, and the afterlife. You are not worthy of salvation on your own. You have to believe and behave in certain prescribed ways, period. Liberal religion emphasizes human worthiness and ethical relationship in the here and now. So, worthlessness, authority, and afterlife versus worthiness and relationship in this life. Now, of course, there are all sorts of variations in how different traditions line up and mix those two extremes. A person could write a whole book on it, and some people have. Unitarian Universalists are very much about ethical relationship in the here and now. But we're not the only ones, and that's worth remembering. If you look at the Reformed Jewish tradition, Christian Congregationalists, or the Disciples of Christ, just for starters, they begin with creedal statements about the nature of God and the soul, but they pretty quickly go to how our religious outlook needs to make our ethics manifest in daily life. As they would put it, what discipleship really means. What does make Unitarian Universalism different is that we don't start out with a creedal statement at all. We don't have a creed. We have our 7 principles which we agree to affirm and promote. And I'll speak in a few weeks on how we got the 7 principles. For now, it's enough to note that they don't say a word about God or belief or the afterlife or people's souls. Unitarian Universalists, as you've probably noticed, have religious beliefs that are all over the map. One person's an atheist, another is a non-theistic Christian, another is a theistic non-Christian, or a pagan, or a mystic, and there's just no end to it. And then you start mixing and matching. Suffice to say, our 7 principles are not about what each one of us believes. They're our best stab for the time being, about how we want to live with one another and with the world around us. I often say, a creedal statement, be it the Nicene Creed or one of the faith statements I referred to earlier, represents the end of a long conversation, and that's the way it is. For us, our 7 principles should be the beginning of a conversation about what that principle means to each one of us in real life. Our 7 principles are an ongoing conversation and a living promise. They have changed in the past, they're likely to change again in the future. Just for the record, when the Unitarian Universalist Association first formed in the 1960s, there were only 6 principles, and they would be unrecognizable to anyone who joined in the last 20 years. Which brings us to the key word in the principles as they're now constituted. There's a word for that living promise I mentioned, and that word is covenant. The 7 principle statement in our association bylaws begins by saying, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, and then it launches into the 7 principles themselves. Now, it's worth noting that in the 7 principles statement, the word covenant is a verb. We covenant to affirm and promote. Once you've done it, of course, it becomes a noun. You've used democratic process to construct a living promise between voluntary equals. So, we're going to take a deep dive into that word covenant. It has multiple definitions and a very ancient history going back 3,500 years, 3,500 years to relationships between kingdoms and empires in the ancient Near East. We can break down their treaties, covenants, into two kinds. As this morning's reading specifies, we have what scholars call parity treaties and vassal treaties. Hundreds of years later, when Hebrew scribes were composing what became variously known as the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, or what some Christian traditions now call the Old Covenant, they modeled their allegiance to God, Yahweh, using the language of the diplomatic treaties of their day. They were worshipers, and Yahweh was the all-powerful God, so a promise between equals would not have been appropriate, so they framed their covenant as a vassal treaty, with Yahweh as the superior party. Crucially, though, the ancient Hebrews did add an ethical element to their covenant with God, and that's important. They were the only Middle Eastern religion to really take that possibility seriously. And the Encyclopedia of Religion tells us that, quote, the religious covenant called for two different things: allegiance to a single God and observance of important mutual obligations in the society, respect for life, property, justice, and so on. In other words, ancient Hebrew covenants prescribe both the way they would worship and the way they would act toward one another in the real world. The best known covenant, not the first, but the best known, is of course what we now call the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. And for the record, the Ten Commandments consist of 4 ritual rules, how to worship, and 6 ethical rules. In effect, they were a living promise to worship faithfully, but also to act justly and ethically, including toward those who were weakest. Also, for what it's worth, if you read the Gospels carefully, Jesus of Nazareth threw out the first 4 ritual commandments, how to worship. He used only the 6 ethical commandments. Jesus was basically a religious liberal. And one gripe I have with fundamentalist Christianity today is that it worries so much about ritual and hierarchical rules and cares so little about ethical relationship. Now, that's just my opinion. You're free to agree or disagree. But when Christianity became the religious arm of the Roman Empire, the emperor didn't care about Jesus' ethical teaching, and the church stayed in power by pleasing the emperor. So from St. Augustine on, about 430 AD on, ethical conduct and right relationship became subservient to authority. Belief in the godhood of Jesus himself and the institutional power of the church in partnership with the Roman state. And even after Rome fell, you could not get to heaven without the approval of the institutional church, of the Catholic Church as it became known. For 1,000 years, Europe's religious life was lived through church authority. Unless a person took part in the church's sacraments with church approval, they were cut off from God, no matter how ethical they were in other ways. In its own way, the church did care about ethics and a lot about morals, but church authority decided which issues mattered and which ones didn't. Again, that difference between ethical relationship on the one hand and authority and what you had to believe word for word on the other. And then came the Protestant Reformation, challenging the medieval church's authority. Martin Luther wrote that salvation was between each individual and God, the priesthood of all believers, as he called it. And John Calvin's writing was slightly different. He emphasized human depravity, predestination, but also the bonds within the church as a community of God. So Calvinist churches, what we call Reformed or Covenantal churches, were kind of fundamentalist traditions with the seeds of liberal religion embedded inside them. And I'll say more about that in a few minutes. Today, we wouldn't think the differences between the various Christian theologies were a big deal, but at the time, in the 1500s and 1600s, they set off religious warfare between Roman Catholicism, Lutheranism, and Calvinism that killed millions. Religious authority is a ruthless master. After all, if God is everything and human beings are worthless, which is what Calvin wrote, then anything you do for God is justified up to and including killing people who disagree with you. Even today, that's still the kind of thinking that gets Planned Parenthood clinics bombed and motivates people to fly airplanes into buildings. Meanwhile, the minority churches of what we now call the Radical Reformation, including Polish and Transylvanian Unitarians, focused on a religion that served worthy humanity rather than the other way around. Just as Christian progressives today have worked hard to reclaim the more ethical faith that Jesus actually preached. I want to make sure I'm not tarring everybody with the same brush, because there's a wide range there. The Calvinist churches, including the Swedish Covenant Church, Scottish Covenanters, later known as Presbyterians, and English Puritans, some of whom settled New England in the 1600s, also turned back to the Bible to find guidance on how faithful people ought to live together. Now, this was still mostly based on the ancient Near Eastern Vassal Treaty, but it did include some of the ethical component the ancient Hebrews had added. That was one seed of the liberal religion within Calvinism that I mentioned. Not the only one, but one important one. In theory, a church's members manifested God's love and law by being in right relationship with one another. So, one of the first legal documents in America was an agreement called the Mayflower Compact in 1620, and a second was the Cambridge Platform in 1637. Reverend Van Zandt talked about both of them a month ago, so I won't repeat his in-depth explanation. Just go to the UCOV website and click on the January 2nd service. If you want a review, you'll be in business. But despite its religious language, the Mayflower Compact is a civil agreement. So you could say that the covenant was turning full circle. It began with secular treaties which the ancient Hebrew priests adapted for religious use, and then Calvinist Puritans came to New England and readapted them and began to shape secular American democracy. And another covenant, as Reverend Van Zandt explained, was the Cambridge Platform, which laid out what we now call congregational polity. Each congregation sets up its own policies, chooses its own minister, and so on. Without that independence between churches, American Unitarianism probably could not have developed in the first place, or at least it wouldn't have developed in the same way. Diverse free thinkers though we are, Unitarian Universalists are directly descended from that liberal seed within New England's conservative Puritans. Our covenants have evolved a long way, but as with any evolution, past vestiges still remain. We still operate using procedures similar to the Reformed Church Presbyterians and the Congregationalists. One important change, we evolved from the vassal covenant model to a parity covenant. As diverse believers and non-believers, our covenants no longer have anything to do with God. As theologian James Luther Adams put it, they are willing, ethical agreements between free and equal partners. Or to say that a different way, fundamentalists still do talk about covenants, but to them, a covenant is an obligation handed down from on high, the vassal treaty model. For example, what they call covenant marriage, just as one example. That's all about obligations, and mostly the wife's obligations to the husband. Using the parity covenant model, we have a different definition. It's a different definition. A covenant is a sincere, living promise voluntarily entered into by equals. And it's worth remembering that with any word that has multiple definitions, we need to pay attention to the definition we're using. Our leading authority on covenantal theology is James Luther Adams, who was the most important Unitarian Universalist theologian of the 20th century. He was born in 1901 to a fundamentalist family. He eventually became a non-theistic Christian, taught at my school, Meadville Lombard Theological School, and then went on to teach at Harvard Divinity School. In the decades after the Unitarian and Universalist merger, he wrote a lot about covenantal theology. He drew both from biblical history, but also from his ethical training. Faith must be the sister of justice, he wrote, and a purely spiritual faith is a purely spurious faith, close quote. And that's another topic that would fill a whole sermon. He was fairly ferocious. Ask his ex-students. Important for today is the way Adams' writing influenced the Unitarian Universalist Association rewrite of our principles in the 1980s. And Adams summed up his covenantal theology in 1974 in a very short essay, very easy to read, From Cage to Covenant. He contrasts between what he calls the cage, the authoritarian medieval church-state combine, versus the covenant, a society of ethical promises made voluntarily between equals. Adams emphasized 5 key points in covenants. First, human beings are at our best when we make serious promises to one another and try hard to keep them. We are, he writes, the only animal that makes promises. He writes that we are, quote, promise-making, promise-keeping, promise-breaking, promise-renewing beings. Our very humanity lies in the way we carry out our promises to our families, our co-workers, our neighbors, and our fellow members of the human and earth family. And to me, that's pretty profound. Second point is that to be genuine, a covenant needs to be a covenant of being. It's not just about good words. It's about ethical actions. Third, the covenant exists for the sake of each individual as well as for the whole group. It is both a gift and a responsibility. The individual is brought into just relationship with the rest of the group, but each individual is also responsible, has a stake in what the whole group does. And it's worth saying that Adams came of age during the Nazi years and also World War II, the 30s and 40s, when, of course, the concentration camps got opened up, and a lot of German citizens, a lot of Eastern European citizens were saying, we didn't know, or there wasn't anything I could do about it. But if what my nation or my church do is wrong, I share a piece of that responsibility. It's not just about blaming one person, one faction, or one political party. It's not enough to say I didn't know what was going on or there's nothing I can do about it. My covenantal duty is to be informed about what's happening and to do my best to act on that information. Fourth, Adams says, quote, the covenantal responsibility is especially directed toward the deprived, close quote. Covenantal living demands that we pay attention to those who suffer from society's neglect or injustice, and that we try to do something about it. And he also reminds us of the difference that can exist between our covenant and our actions. One task of the covenantal church is to call attention to the gap between noble-sounding words versus harmful or oppressive actions. speaking truth to power. Finally, he makes the point that, quote, the covenant is not fundamentally a legal covenant. It depends on faithfulness, and faithfulness is nerved by loyalty, by love, close quote. In other words, covenantal living is, for one thing, not about obeying the letter of the law while we hurt people through greed or carelessness. Violation of a covenant is serious not because it breaks a law, but because it's a violation of trust. It's a breach of faith. At its best, and at our best, this kind of living does call forth the best that is in us. Our covenant does not ask us to be perfect. Good thing. It does ask us to look at our own mistakes and try earnestly to correct them. So that's a quick primer on covenantal religion. To me, it really does embody a kind of simple and human faith. Just getting out of bed each morning makes a statement about life and ultimate reality based solely on faith. That is, that life is worth living. It's worth getting up in the morning. Your life matters, and my life matters as well, and the future can be, with all that's happened, still can be better than the past. Fulfilling our covenantal promises, being true to one another, honest enough to admit our own human mistakes and cultural shortcomings and trying to correct them, those are, in theory at least, pretty simple things. That doesn't make them easy. We can only do our best. Let us do our best together. Amen. May it be so. And I invite you, as you're willing and able, to stand and join in singing hymn number 290, Bring, O Past Your Honor. It's modern words with very old roots. You'll probably recognize the melody if you've been to many non-UU churches. Our religion lies not in what we believe, but in where we find wonder and goodness. We are, most of all, a community which gathers to try to touch those things which hover just beyond our grasp. The chalice is extinguished, and let the congregation reply, may its light go with us into the world. As we go from this place, may the glow of love and enlightenment guide our way, and may the rhythm of our footsteps soothe and bless the earth so long as we walk upon it. Shalom, salam, salam, shalom, blessed be, and amen.
That